Happy New Year, everybody. It is the 5th of January. It's super late here in Seoul. Normally, I record this podcast inside my apartment with the equipment that I have, but right now, I am happy to say that we are in a new studio space that we're going to be using for future video episodes of the podcast. This podcast was recorded late in November last year. But from here on out, we're going to have plenty more video podcasts in the future. This doesn't mean we won't have some audio podcasts, just depending on the circumstances. Like if I'm overseas, it depends on how much equipment I can bring with me. But we will have a base here in Seoul. So thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It is really appreciated. We did unlock that goal. So I'm really excited with the new year to go to this next step for the show. The video production and editing is going to cost a little bit more. So if you love this show and want to keep supporting it, even $5 goes a really long way. So please support us at patreon.com/tasteless podcast. With Patreon support, you get access to our exclusive content, such as our after show, which is actually fucking awesome. I'm really happy with this addition to the show, and much more. So this episode stars Kattermari. He is the event director for the East Coast Throwdown, as well as the senior director of Esports at Intersport. He's involved in a lot of the behind-the-scenes business stuff with the FGC, and also the league operator for Mortal Kombat 11 Pro competition. I had a great conversation with Kattermari. I had not actually met this guy before. I got my connection to him through some of the people I know in the FGC out here in Seoul. He was out here on holidays, so it was really cool for him to come in and sit down and chat with me. We talk about a lot of interesting stuff. We also tried something a little bit different this time around. Usually I end up picking up the podcast guests, maybe at the train station, or I go to where their hotel is, and then I bring them to my apartment. And I've noticed that a lot of times the really good parts of our conversation are right at the start, kind of the icebreakers. And I realized I'm missing a lot of, this is like a lot of stuff I'd like to just put into the podcast, but I can't record it while I'm on the way down to my house. So I had somebody else pick up Kattermari, and then we brought him into my house. I met him right there. We sat down in front of the mics, and we just started talking. I'm not sure where we're going to jump in exactly as of when this recording is made, but it's going to be right somewhere in the start. So we're just sitting down. We're talking about arcades and some rhythm game stuff, and then we go into some other stuff. So we're still kind of experimenting here on different ways to make the show and the conversation better. Anyways, here is our last recording of the year 2019? Yeah, we're in 2020. Shit. This is the last recording of 2019. Enjoy the Tasteless podcast with our guest, Kattermari. Oh, so wait, which rhythm games did you play? Did you beat Mania?
2DX was way too hard, man.
Dude, I was so into 2DX, man.
Way too hard. No, mostly like...
I just got to shot this for the sound here.
DDR, Pump.
Okay, yeah.
And then like In the Groove is actually where I got like actually good at a game, like a rhythm game for the first time, and like travel.
Which game was this?
So do you remember? It's like towards what was it? I want to say like circa 2006 is when it started becoming a thing. So
this is a Japanese rhythm game, right?
No. It was actually American made. So
okay,
there
I think
was,
I've heard of this.
Yeah, there was DDR, and then DDR kind of like tapered off. There wasn't like new versions at all. And
right.
then one like an arcade, like have you ever heard of 8 on the Break? It's like super old school arcade, still around. One of the only like true arcades still around in the U.S.
Okay.
The owner of that kind of like subsidized a new project with the guy, your cat's so cute.
Oh yeah, man.
Subsidized a project with a company called Roxer, and then they actually ended up using Andamiro here, like the company that makes the Pump It Up cabinets, to build like the actual arcade cabinets. So it was basically the same thing, like 4-panel, like DDR, and it was just way harder. Like it broke like the mold of like what people thought was like humanly possible.
Was that a rhythm game with just like you use buttons on your hands, or
no? It was the same DDR template, exact same.
Okay.
4-panel, like
Four
down,
panel.
left,
okay,
right.
Got it. All right.
Yeah, it just like broke the bounds of what anyone thought at the time was possible. Like the game came out, and we're seeing like all these like expert level charts for like, no, this is a joke, right? Like no one can do this. Like, no way.
Yeah.
Sure enough, like within a year, it just became like standard. They made a second version and then got hit and lost the lawsuit to Konami.
Oh, really?
Copyright. And then like the crazy thing is like the saving grace, and this is so funny. Because you've heard of like Stepmania, right?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
So basically, they turned like their game into Stepmania and just like put out a patch that made it open source from a thumb drive. So it's like you can bring in like your own music with like Stepmania based charts into it and like just go crazy. So it just like was open source, like arcade level, like Stepmania.
There was what was the Beatmania version of that where you could use your keyboard? Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. There was
O2 Jam?
I think that might have been what it was
too,
called.
Right?
I think so.
It looked similar.
Yeah, my brother and me grew up playing Beatmania in the arcade and then playing some fighting games on the side. But I remember my dad lives in Hong Kong, but when we were kids, we were visiting him for a family trip. And so we went to this Hong Kong arcade, and that's the first time I saw somebody playing 2DX, but like both hands. How do I say this? 7 buttons on one hand, 7 buttons on the other hand, and each turntable. And my mind was like, it was one of those moments where I thought, I can't fucking comprehend that anybody can be this good at a rhythm game. It's insane.
It's nuts. That and then like what else was like around the same era, like poppin' music.
Right, that's the one with the bubbles.
Yeah. Which at the time, like when I saw it, I'm like, oh, this has got to be the easier one. And then I realized, like after you get into it a little bit, you're like, no, that's not.
Yeah, I used to hurt my hands when I tried to play that game because I'd start hitting the buttons too hard and end up with bruises on my palms.
Yeah, that's why people like a lot of people when they play it, they wear like gloves,
like rhythm
they
game
like slide it and stuff.
Or
Yeah. There's so many rhythm games now too. Like the last like trip I took to like Tokyo, just like stepping in like some of like the rhythm game sections.
Yeah,
like
it seems like it's specifically a Japanese trend though, right?
I guess I don't know.
I don't see it as much in other countries, including arcades out here. There's like maybe 1 or 2 cabinets in the arcade.
Pump is like the big thing here still, and like that's about it. But no, we actually, because in the U.S. they broke out the Round 1 franchise for U.S. locations, so they have like all the exclusive like import deals with a lot of the arcade manufacturers from Japan. So they're getting all like the obscure rhythm games coming in, and then on top of that, like because they all have them networked in Japan to like digital like leaderboard system.
Right.
They're actually like made some weird IP exceptions to like Round 1 U.S. locations to participate in like global leaderboards, which is like why Konami now, like, God, Konami is like when it comes to their like global initiatives, it's such a mess.
It seems like it, yeah.
But they're like their DDR World Championships and stuff. They have it's actually inclusive of like other regions besides Japan now. Like,
I actually had no idea they even had that. There's a DDR World Championship.
Yeah, it's like part of a larger like arcade expo that they do.
Okay,
but. Yeah, it's all part of like you can actually qualify in through like regional like ranking points, like score points and stuff like that based off of qualifying songs that like are all tied to your online profile now. So it's like you have to go to like a Round 1 arcade in America to like participate in that.
So this is your first time here in Korea, right?
Yeah.
Where are you going after this?
Home. So home for me is right now. It's technically northern New Jersey.
Okay.
So it's like 20 minutes outside of Manhattan. So actually, like if you're familiar with American football, so right next to the Giant Stadium, MetLife Stadium.
Okay.
So right there, super close.
And when's the next tournament you're going to be working at?
Actually, I have a good throughout the rest of the year. I'm pretty off. I'll probably take a swing by to Capcom Cup. So that's in like two weeks from now, 2 weekends, something like that, over in LA. So.
Okay, so you're like an off season. It's the same thing for me. I have one more day of work tomorrow, and then that's it.
Well, quote unquote off season.
Right.
Technically, so this coming weekend is the last stop for the Mortal Kombat Pro competition over at NEC in Philadelphia region. So that'll solidify for the final spots essentially for the Final Kombat event in March. So whittle that down to our top 15. Get our show.
Yeah, and are you a big Mortal Kombat fan? Because I feel like Mortal Kombat, for me personally, I think this is one of the best versions of the game ever.
It is.
It's incredible.
It depends on who you ask, right? Or like what you like in your games. I think from a competitive side, especially if you look for kind of the prominent players, it has been the most balanced NetherRealm Studios game, I think, fighting game like ever created. That comes with the caveat that if you were more adept to kind of Mortal Kombat 9, Mortal Kombat X, just kind of like the variation from like mix-up options, combo extensions, and routes were way more flashy and impactful, but it's definitely not balanced games by any means.
Right.
So definitely a lot more stress involved. Mortal Kombat 11 has its own layers of stress with Fatal Blow system and all of that, but the competitive scene seems to gravitate heavy towards it, and the balancing, like the patch by patch balancing, has like historically been really drastic in NRS games, where you'll see huge tier list swings. It's been way more deliberate with Mortal Kombat 11, and it feels a lot more like rational to get to a better like level playing field.
Do you find this is something I've been wondering, because like Mortal Kombat 11 in Korea, you actually can't get legally.
Yeah, same with Japan too.
Right.
Yeah.
And in a lot of countries because of the extreme violence. And I was curious about this because, you know, esports is getting so global and different games are encountering different problems, right? Like Counter-Strike, and this is something I meant to ask Moses on our last episode, but I forgot to, but Counter-Strike has this problem where, you know, it's terrorists versus counter-terrorists, which at the time nobody seemed to mind, but nowadays it's sort of distasteful, at least for major sponsors, right? Like the Olympics is looking at getting certain esports titles, and it just looks like there's no fucking way they could ever have Counter-Strike just in a
naming convention alone. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We just can't have terrorists and counter-terrorists and that's a type of role play. Where other games seem like they've been okay. Capcom has some deal going on with the Olympics now for Street Fighter.
Yep. Intel.
Yeah. And I wonder because although, you know, Mortal Kombat couldn't upset people in the same way as a counter-terrorist situation. The violence is so extreme. Does that interfere with it as a game being able to grow and expand?
I think it's a weird balance too, right? Because if you look at it from just like removing like Smash from the equation, right?
Sure, yeah.
That's its own unique
Smash
beast.
always has to be over there.
Yeah, but from just like a pure, you know, ultimately as like game developers, right? It's unit sales are kind of king in a lot of ways. And
right.
Mortal Kombat from a unit sales perspective compared to other fighting games in that space is truly like at the top of the throne. A lot of it's just, you know, the experience. Like you've played Mortal Kombat 11. Have you played like 9 and X as well? Or?
I didn't play 9 or X. I played a lot of the old Mortal Kombats when I was growing up in arcades. Like, but I did get 11 when it came out, and I loved that they kind of stayed true to the gore.
Yeah.
I mean, in a weird way, like you can't have Mortal Kombat and not have the extreme violence. And I mean, that game was revolutionary at the time when we were all young. That was the first game that basically pushed rating systems into games.
Yeah, almost still is when you see like the innovation and all the fatalities and everything that they keep developing in. I'm like, dude, how did they keep like? You'd think they keep running out of ideas. Like eventually,
right.
It's just like no,
ways to kill somebody.
Yeah, exactly. It's incredible. But you know, just from like the actual like what that product is as like in a standalone game, forget the competitive aspect of it, is so strong. Just like the single player campaigns that you go through, it's like truly like a cinematic universe at this point, right?
Yeah.
And just like the attachment that you develop for the characters throughout those stories is like bar none kind of the leader within fighting games.
They changed the story for Mortal Kombat entirely when it switched publishers, right? Like they had this whole time travel thing.
It's so confusing. It's so confusing.
Fucking, I was watching this YouTube video because basically I got right when Mortal Kombat 11 came out, I bought it, and then I realized I was in the middle of a story when it starts up. So I thought, okay, let's go back, and then I realized, oh fuck, this is insane. They made like 10 games, and it got so convoluted. They made this like time travel snafu that now we've gone back to the beginning, or I think where Mortal Kombat 2 ended. And then we're going to resume from there in a different timeline.
Yeah, well, now it's even really confusing now with like 11. They brought in like Chronica, and there's all this like time travel, like different like timelines that they're going bouncing back and forth between. So it's all over the place and a little hard to comprehend. Actually, if you want to make things simple for yourself, anyone that just like is super curious to just general like MK lore and more importantly, I guess like the history of competitive MK. So have you heard of Ketchup and Mustard at all?
No.
So they're from the UK, and they also do a lot of work with like Quake and Doom and stuff like that. But they really got their stride with like their MK like super fans and commentators. They're twins actually, but they've done like an incredible, especially like Ketchup has put this unbelievable series together of just like this chronicle of MK like history, lore, and even more deep into the like ground on that, the competitive aspect of like every MK starting with like MK1. So if you want to see like where like the crazy original like arcade like janky like competitive meta comes from, that I swear most people just had no idea even existed. It's all like documented through his kind of like memoirs of like.
Oh, that's cool. I should check that out because you know, Smash was always obtuse until that Smash Brothers documentary came out. And kind of put that into the mainstream. But it seems like now Mortal Kombat 11. I guess I should say the Mortal Kombat franchise in general, it seems like it's more in line or in step with the other major FGCs or admitted fighting games. Do you feel that's the case?
It almost like, in a way, since we see, you kind of look at Smash community as its own lane.
Right.
NetherRealm players historically, so like NetherRealm meaning, in the Injustice series, Mortal Kombat series, there is crossover, but a lot of those prominent and like dominant players in those NetherRealm titles are fairly exclusive. Like they'll dabble and play in other games. I mean, Sonic Fox being like one of the big exceptions.
Right.
Like if he's serious about a game, he'll.
He's fucking so good. It's crazy.
Watch out. Like if he's serious and invests time, it's terrifying. But you look at like the competitive landscape and you look at a lot of those names that you'll see like in finishing, like in qualifying for a final combat, or even in just like the top 32 of any major tournament on the pro competition. A lot of those names like dwell and exist specifically within NetherRealm games. And I think a lot of that also has to do with kind of the accessibility of Mortal Kombat. I don't mean like necessarily ease of like player acquisition into like how to play the game competitively, but more so just like you hear the number one complaint for fighting game players is like terrible online experience in netcode, especially in the West, right? Totally different here. Like I understand now, and speaking with kind of the local like Korean community, or at least the guys that are running a lot of the local events here, that it's such a challenge to overcome getting people to come out to offline or physical events because the online is the online experience is so smooth. Yeah,
you can absolutely just stay at home.
Yeah, we don't have that.
Like, in Tekken, the online play, it's incredible. It's been incredible for a long time too. I don't know. I know that overall the internet here is very fast, but I haven't played any fighting games in the States online. I mean, is it that pronounced in your experience?
Oh yeah. I mean, you're looking at the same netcode, but you take Tekken 7 online back home to the US. It's not like it's unplayable, but you're trying to play from, like New York to California. No.
Yeah, I wonder if that's just an advantage for here because everything is so close together with the high-speed internet. Like Korea's not physically a very big country.
No, yeah, I mean that helps too, but also just like the stability and speeds. Because like I can't, I'm right outside of a major, one of the most major cities and markets in the U.S. and I can't get like a fiber connection in my apartment.
Yeah,
like I'm still running off of like a Comcast connection with like maybe like 10 up on a good day.
So is that purely just an internet connection issue, not a coding issue inside the game?
Both. It's definitely both. And I think that's the exceptions where I was going, is that Mortal Kombat, they've kind of implemented their own system based off of like a rollback netcode, I believe. Not 100% sure on that. But it's allowed for an online experience with our connections and speeds that has allowed cross-country play and even cross-region play. Like there are training partners that are playing between, London and Florida. Right now. And it's totally smooth. You're talking maybe like 2 to 3 frame delay, which is like, it's incredible. That's totally playable and viable for online fighting game play. Like probably like the upper limits of it, but it works. So because of that, it's definitely opened the gate for a lot of players. And speaking with a lot of like upper echelon players in NetherRealm games is you've heard, like I've heard them kind of chronicle like their journey getting into the competitive scene. It's like purely born off of online.
Yeah.
And it's just because it's accessible. Like they never had to invest like a significant amount of like capital to travel to an event or like do their research or homework. They were kind of thrown into it and almost forced into the spotlight just based off of, them running and playing with, community-based top players and being recognized for that. So, you'll see a huge name that's just started coming out to physical events this year. This guy, Ninja Killa.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is his first year really like going to offline events, and he's already taken a pro competition event this year. He's consistently getting in top 3s when he shows up to events. Like he's incredible and talented, and he's really discovered online, which doesn't really happen in other fighting games as much. Anyways.
But until you can get good online play, it's almost like the luck of the draw is like to where you were born or what neighborhood you grew up in. Was there an arcade close to you? There was a similar situation actually for StarCraft, which was that all the Korean pros, they didn't play online. They would play on LAN, or they play on LAN in PC cafes. Yeah. And back then for StarCraft 1, if you weren't playing on LAN, it was like a different game. So people who would play online like me back in the States, it's like I can't even move at the same rate as what these guys are doing. And that was a huge problem with people trying to improve. And it really didn't get improved until maybe right before StarCraft 2 came out. But it was about a decade in there of just, I mean, you would see a non-Korean go and compete against a Korean at an actual LAN event, and these guys would just outmaneuver them entirely. But that's exciting now to see that here with the online play for Mortal Kombat 11, it's actually doable. And it seems like it's finally happening in fighting games where you can actually be somebody as a solo unit and actually get good and not necessarily have to be around people. But then again, I guess that does kind of affect the community element as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the catch-22s, honestly, is that when you see one of the biggest like Twitter hot topics right now on the community side is asking for what's like considered rollback netcode, if you've heard like the term like GGPO being thrown around. So it's like a patented type of like netcode.
So what does GGPO stand for? I'm actually not familiar with that.
So it's actually the founders of Evo, the Cannon brothers. That's actually something they had developed for, I forgot which online platform it was at the time, for like ROM-based fighting games, so like Third Strike and Super Turbo and stuff like that. And apparently it's open for developer use, like kind of like royalty free, I think. I think
really?
They relinquished like the licensing to like some department over at MIT recently. So it's been like this huge push from the community side to have publishers like from the get-go kind of look to develop their games netcodes based around this form of rollback netcode, which, like I said, is I believe is kind of what Mortal Kombat built theirs off of, like their own variation or original version of it. And it's that's one of those things. But I think the flip side of that is if that does happen and it is widely adopted and we are able to have kind of like cross-country or even like cross-continent play, like viable competitive play, the impact and ripple effect that has on a community level is pretty drastic, as seen here. As you have so much tech and talent here, and they're not necessarily, it doesn't seem like they're coming necessarily to local events, whether it's like weekly or monthly necessarily. And that also affects kind of like the average, or at least my theory is that it would affect like the average player skill level too, because if you think about information sharing, right, and like steps to improvement, I think it's one of the biggest criticisms of fighting games is it's not necessarily baked in or articulated within the games themselves.
Sure. How
to improve, like, you know, what aspects.
Seems like you have to go on YouTube or go to a forum somewhere, and then you have to learn the inputs, which if you don't play fighting games is totally unnatural.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
But I also, like, that only can take you, I mean, some people are very adept to being able to, you know, process and digest information that way. But like when I learned fighting games for the first time, like I had a person next to me providing me like real-time feedback.
This is the same for me. I had someone in an arcade showing me like, no, this is how you fireball. Not like you're holding the joystick wrong, you know, or use this finger on this button, stuff like that.
Yeah, and even just like, you know, from like a mental element too, or like the psychology of it too, is just understanding like why players make certain actions in specific situations and trying to like digest that whole aspect of fighting games is like in isolation is very few people can accomplish that.
Yeah.
You know, and being able to actually openly discuss and share kind of that wealth of that knowledge bank, that like kind of community knowledge, collective knowledge was super important. I think still is super important, which is why, especially when you look at like major, like fighting game major events, and there's like a gathering of so many different like regions and pockets, you know, you could be in a major city and you'd think that everyone wants to go and explore and have a good time and like, you know, go eat and drink together, and half of like, especially anyone that's remotely serious about the game, they'll just look for, okay, whose room is open, is this venue 24 hours, like how do we like get together?
Every game there's like two types of gamers when you go to a tournament: the people that actually want to go experience the city, and then the people that are probably going to win the tournament because they're in their hotel room or they're just grinding out games. That's so funny.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like sharing knowledge. It's like oh, like I don't have like a player that plays this character that well in my scene, like let me try to get some games with them, like try to get into like the experience and like understanding of like how to play this matchup, like how like maybe like, oh, this region is a different play style than us, like why, how do I get experience and exposure to this? So I think that is like I guess it's too early to tell until it's like a reality of just how much kind of like a sufficient netcode would affect the average skill levels, or just like general like community health.
Yeah.
So,
when I was interviewing Spag, one of the things I was most excited to ask him about, and this has just been kind of a cool phenomenon in general in Tekken, is the discovery of, at least for most people, this massive Pakistani scene.
Yeah.
That was apparently just there and growing and was basically quiet the whole time as far as global presence goes. Is there anything like that happening in Mortal Kombat 11? Or is there any scenes to watch for or areas of the world where people are actually really good?
Yeah, and I'd say we've just started seeing a glimpse of it, and I'm not necessarily saying that they're better than some of like a lot of the top US talent by any means, but I think that it's the opportunity certainly there for in the near future to become this kind of like revolutionary moment in NetherRealm games. But the player base and even more so the general fan base for Mortal Kombat in South America, specifically Brazil, is on like a different plane of reality. So we actually brought for the Mortal Kombat Pro competition, one of the 9 events on that tour was a Brazil game show this year, and I think Brazil game show is like 2nd or 3rd largest game show in the world. Like, it's massive. It's within the old like Olympic Park. The amount of participation from just like local Brazilians was unreal, and guys that we've never seen. We knew of them, but never necessarily saw them play with international competitors. Was like a huge shock. Like a couple guys from the US, like Forever King or some of those names that you see them like very comfortable seeing them in like top 32, top 16 positions, like routinely amongst like probably the most dominant player field out there. Just like couldn't break top 8 positions like over there.
Really?
Yeah, and it was, the true like top of the top talent there, I'm not sure it goes necessarily toe to toe yet with a Sonic Fox or a Ninja Killer or Dragon or anybody over in the States, but like the promise is there, right? It's like there's like a hunger, there's like a strong community presence, and the fandom is on a different level. Like the amount of like Mortal Kombat cosplay we saw there, just like from the general fans, and just their turn out to watch finals. Like I'm sure you've seen like, for major events, you look in the crowd for any finals that's not Evo Combo Breaker or like CEO, and it's okay, maybe like 50 to 100 people watching, right?
Which is awesome. It can be endearing too. It's like, oh, sick, look at this number of people that kind of came and gathered together, but it's not on a major scope at times.
Right. This was like somewhere between 500 and 1,000 just general MK fans, not even like competitive players, like showing up at Brazil game show and sat down and watched the full top 16 with like energy throughout the entirety of that show.
That's so crazy. It seems like there's, especially within fighting games, in the next 5 years, I think we're going to see a lot of different regions of the world pop up that people just weren't thinking about.
Yeah.
Like even one of the most recent Tekken tournaments in the Philippines, I mean, the audience was just fucking massive.
Yeah. Rev Major, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It was just huge. And I mean, as somebody who lives in Seoul, I kind of always think of Tekken as kind of just a Korean thing on some level, but not the case at all. There's actually just, it's so much bigger, and there's so many other places that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be, I guess, it wouldn't be your first thought that this is a competitive gaming region of the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's also like Tekken's an interesting point, especially for this kind of like generation of fighting games, right? Is if you look at it right now, Tekken 7 might be considered kind of like the community champion, so to speak, from just like a participation and like in a player investment level. And I think a lot of that is in due part to a lot of the interesting storylines that like the game has created organically, is why people have rallied behind it so much. And also it's, it's a good game. But I think now that there's just like so much general global interest for it and all these really exciting moments, like it compels a lot of people even that have been long time players of other fighting games to really want to dive into it.
What is publisher support like for Mortal Kombat 11 on an esports level? I mean, is this obviously it's continuing to grow and that's really exciting, but sometimes you have companies where they will put out an esports like budget because other companies are doing that, where they're like, well, if these other games are doing it, we might as well have our own. I mean, how ambitious do you find them to be in this regard to their esports?
I mean, I think it's comparable to what you're seeing out of Capcom Pro Tour, Tekken World Tour.
Yeah.
And it's definitely, there's more and more consideration on that side of the house for kind of like longevity of like how to support the scene. And I think that's also like reflected as well, right? Is like how they're actually like treating like the balance of the game moving forward too. It's like understandably so. It's like you look at the sales volume of Mortal Kombat 11. It's like, yeah, that's a more general consumer friendly game, but at least and the competitive community makes up such a small fraction of what that like true user base is. But there's being a heck of a lot more consideration around what is kind of best for that community, like competitive community. Definitely a lot more interest in how to sustain that year over year, as opposed to just kind of like you said, one-off programs and platforms.
Yeah, where they just get this budget and they're going to spend it, and they might not have any goal for the next year or any way to build it. So I have to. There's always two fighting games, or I guess I should say two publishers I have to talk about whenever I bring anybody from the FGC on. And the first one hasn't released their game yet, but we all know that Riot is making a fighting game.
Oh, yes.
League of Legends is basically the biggest game in the world, according to most metrics. They seem to have run the most sustainable esports tournament model. Their game is actually older than StarCraft 2. I think their game is... It has to be 10 and a half years old, because that the announcement of all their games was the 10-year anniversary, right? And they've been working on a fighter for some time, and I think it's pretty obvious to everybody that they're going to try to do this some very similar model to what they have with League of Legends with that. First, what is your take on Riot walking into the fighting game space?
Well, I mean, for starters, it's not unwarranted considering the team that they have. I mean, you're looking at they brought the Cannon brothers in, right?
Yeah.
So at least just from a fundamental level, it's like there is complete I wouldn't say pure, not perfectly pure intent, but well intent, right? To kind of respect the genre. So that's, I mean, at least a net positive out the gate. But it'll be interesting to see this is all theory, right? We don't know until it comes out. But just kind of what it does on a community level is probably the most important question, because we've seen all sorts of takes across the board from community members from if there's a franchise league and we have to be exclusive to this game and we're guaranteed this prize pool, yeah, I'm all about it, let's dive into it. And other people that are just it's we like fighting games because of the variety, right? If I'm primarily a Street Fighter player, that's great, but I like playing other games too. There's an enjoyment in that variety.
What are the rules with that? Do you mind looking this up, Ryan? Riot's rules on exclusivity with games? Are they not? Is it pro gamers are not allowed to stream other games, or they're not allowed to compete?
Dude,
I'm actually not sure. I know that there's something there, but I've never actually.
It's not based. I don't think necessarily these viewpoints from a community side aren't based necessarily in any fact or reality.
Right,
it's just kind of all
speculation,
all speculation,
yeah.
Right? But I mean, the way I see, and this is just my opinion of it, could easily see a world in which this title comes out and has its wild Riot levels of success, but kind of paves its own path from a community perspective, much in kind of akin to the Smash community, right? Where it kind of exists, they are parallel to each other, and there's a lot of similarities and overlap, but it kind of almost exists within its own ecosystem, so to speak, and community base. So that's how I think it'll play out, but dude, it's way too. I mean, we saw 10 seconds of over the shoulder,
a throw or something happening.
Yeah, so we have no idea what it's gonna play like, kind of the accessibility for the game itself, any kind of plan for whether it's grassroots or just publisher official event support. What? We have no idea, man. Just wait and see.
Yeah, one of the things. Well, if you look at each of these publishers, whenever they have a game that's in the same kind of genre, they almost have to play off of each other. I think a lot of what happens between Namco and Capcom is because someone did this over here, the other side has to do this. We'll see this with League of Legends and what happens with Dota, whatever Valve chooses to do with that. I'm curious because Riot has so much money and so much already pre-built infrastructure. They're probably going to move in. Again, this is speculation. I don't know, but they're probably going to move in on such a dramatic level. Do you think that's going to impact or change the way that the current major fighting game publishers are going to operate? Are they going to have to step up their game, or you were saying it might just be its own thing, but is there any chance of this maybe forcing, let's say, Capcom to up their ante?
Oh, dude. Who knows, especially because you're talking about Japanese publishers, right? And just like...
That's a whole other conversation
yeah,
we should have here as well. But.
Yeah, like fundamentally speaking, like, I don't even know how they would change their approach to developing like their games based off of what the Riot has done and like kind of that Western.
So for people listening, you know, one of the things about Japanese publishers, first of all, Japan always has a certain way of doing something.
Yeah, and it's not. By the way, that's not an insult at all.
Right.
It's just like I think to a lot of extent, like that was a lot of the allure growing up and like gravitating towards
Japanese games or Japanese storytelling or
100%.
Japanese culture. Yeah, there's a way to do things, and especially in some of these Japanese companies, from what I've been told, you know, seniority is so important. But you end up with some of these people that have run the company for almost their entire lives and are super old now and are at times not that in tune with esports or with competitive gaming or maybe some of the newer trends.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, you can actually probably start seeing that perception altering kind of the way that they are developing their games. Like if you look at like Street Fighter V, even the upcoming Guilty Gear next year, right, is like so many interviews. It was like there was such a, with a lot of the developers themselves, like such a perspective and like lens that they tried to apply to the game as far as looking at like simplicity, as in kind of like that is important for like a Western-based market for accessibility, right?
That's always been a theme in Japanese. Whenever they make a game for the Western market, there's always this consensus, which I don't even think is actually true, but there's always been this consensus that we got to dumb it down for them. They're not gonna want it. This happened with a bunch of games. I think they did this with the original Mario. They simplified that, but. You know, they didn't even want, what is it? No, not Dark Souls. Demon Souls wasn't even initially translated into English because they thought, well, it's going to be too difficult. Westerners don't want that. But there's always been this weird theme of what they perceive the people outside of their country actually want.
Definitely, and I think like a lot of it too is like the core fundamentals of like what fighting games are is a lot of like the decision making process in that 1v1 scenario. So it was like, okay, well, if that is intact and kind of more emphasized by limiting kind of like the execution barrier or whatever it might be, right? To just be boiled down more to the decision making, like that is more digestible for people to, you know, play, watch, and understand. However, I mean, like if you look at it now, we just talked about like Tekken 7 was pretty much chosen as, you know, like the community champion, and like there was some like I'm not a Tekken player personally, so it's like I can't really speak to it as well as tons of others could, but just. There was a very minimal amount of simplification that went into Tekken 7. Yeah. But there's still, it's so in-depth and
they also,
complicated.
In Tekken 7, they also had a training menu that I thought actually you could learn the game in. Like
in Tekken 7?
Yeah. Like they would show you all the moves. Like if you look at Street Fighter 4, when that came out, and this is, sometimes with Japanese games, it's like they've given you an alien artifact and haven't told you anything. It's just like a triangle with blue circles, and they're like, here you go. Like in Street Fighter 4, they don't even give you in the game all the combos that you can do. No. They don't even tell you. No. It's just there. And you can either figure it out on your own or you can go online and find it. And with Tekken 7, and again, I'm also not a Tekken expert, but from everything I've seen with it, every string combo you could think of is in there. It teaches you very clearly how to move your character in a way that's going to make it efficient inside the game.
Sure, but that's the thing is I don't necessarily think, you know, because there's definitely other fighting games, especially like anime fighters, that I'm personally really big on that have probably like the most in-depth and well put together tutorial systems out there, but haven't necessarily yielded in like player acquisition in any way, shape, or form. So I don't necessarily think that the simplification or tutorial base has necessarily like attributed directly to like the growth of the player base for specific games. You know, I don't know anyone that said they got into fighting games because that combo looked easy, you know.
Right,
you know, yeah. It's like because there was some degree of comprehension of, you know, the situation, whether it was from just kind of like a high stress moment of, you know, execution or like key decision making that kind of was like that galaxy brain level play that really drew people into it. Like nobody's picking up the game because it's easy to play.
Right.
You know, especially like, or at least for like a long-term user, right? Like someone might enjoy it more for the week that they get it after release for whatever the other experience is.
As much as developers obsess about accessibility, it does seem like if you're going to really play all the time and watch, you're watching and playing because it's hard, because that's actually the exciting part of it.
There's something to work towards, and like that's definitely caters to like a specific type of mind, or like even almost like to a certain degree, like some games be like, oh man, the person must be like a masochist to grind this out like as hard as they are. But like it definitely appeals to a very specific kind of person, especially being like a solo based game. And like I'm sure like the only other real comparison is like StarCraft, right?
Yeah.
As far as just like truly like
these are the one-on-one games.
Yeah, you're playing in like an isolation. Like the amount of stress, like, and it's something like I actually, you know, one of, I forgot which video it was that like Gerald, like Corey Gaming, like did.
Oh yeah.
Just kind of like the mental toll that just playing as an individual in like a highly competitive environment, like really like the toll that can take on you, performance wise, and also just from like a pure like psychology and like mental health perspective.
You're not generally communicating with anybody else, and if you are, they're the opponent in a one-on-one game.
Yeah, and actually, don't get me wrong. Like a lot of like like even at a high level, like, you know, your number 1, 2, 3, and 4 seeds like are constantly training with each other because like there's no other way to get better, really. You know, if no one else is sharpening up around you, you're just plateauing. But it's certainly, especially like from like a more like casual competitor too, it's, you know, it's almost like that placebo effect where it's like you have the ability to blame everybody else around you, like whether it's your teammates or other random factors that go into having so many kind of like user inputs from different parties one-on-one. Like what's your excuse?
yeah. When you lost, it's because you were not as good as the other player, or you get people that blame their character. Or their
spamming, cheap.
The patch that came out, or
yeah, especially like if you ever get a chance to talk to like a lot of like the New York City based players too, and growing up like way before like my time, like some of like the original like the true OGs like Arturo Sanchez, like Savin, like all those guys, Yipes, just like growing up.
He was so
like,
good at Marvel, man. He was so fucking good.
Just like growing up in like that arcade environment where it's like, I think like Arturo had this story where I think it might have been like MK2 or something like that, or UMK3, where he just kept grabbing somebody over and over again, and they just like pulled a knife on him. Like, yeah, just like that's how
too much disrespect is happening in game.
Yeah, I mean, so at least we've evolved from that point, right?
Yeah.
But it's just super interesting just seeing kind of the barrier to entry from other like non-fighting game fans to get into the series, right? Like all the kind of weird obstacles that exist, such as that. It's like the inability to accept your own fault is one of the hardest.
Yeah, I've had this conversation like on the podcast and off the podcast, but yeah, you can do team games, but for me, I don't get the same high that I get from winning one-on-one. When I've won as just like a self-contained person and it was all me, even though the losses are more painful and more frustrating, I find I for gaming as a drug, I get a bigger high from that. But oddly enough, team games are just bigger in general, I think, because people don't want to have to deal with the pressure of one-on-one games. I guess also team games are social as well.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. I mean, because like we've all dabbled, right? In like multiplayer games, like definitely like spent my time grinding like ranked in Overwatch. I mean, like I still play for fun, just like Apex Legends, like I enjoy it, right? And just like there is something like, you know, what we'll sit there like playing fighting games for like 2 hours, net play or something like that, and decide, like, you know, it would be fun just to, you know, play cooperatively with like some friends or something like that.
Yeah,
you know, there's a nice element to it.
There's a nice social aspect to it.
Yeah, instead of being trapped in my own brain, just like crunching, you know, my notes, like my handwritten notes or like phone notes that I wrote of like matchup, like mess ups I've had, like through my 2 hours in net play, just like struggling, not being able to like implement them properly.
Do you do that if you after you've lost a game, you write something down? I
try to, and don't get me wrong, like I'll do that for like the first like maybe like 4 or 5 games, and then I just get into this weird like mental spiral where it's, you know, you'll the next like hour and a half of your session, like you're mashing like the replay, like recheck button. It totally goes out the window. And well, I mean, that also, you know, you talk to like any good player, and like they're definitely spending a lot of time reviewing their matches and stuff. Not like their ability to like maintain kind of like that regimen and like process definitely helps for sure.
So, just before we go too far away from the Japanese subject, I want to ask you. No. I just want to ask about Smash, about Melee and Ultimate, and what your take is on Nintendo's handling of everything, and the future of Smash, and what's going to happen to Melee, or if the game's going to be fine. I know that was a lot of different questions I asked you, but if you want to pick from the buffet there.
I mean, granted, it's still on a larger level, but I mean, like, especially when you're talking about the preservation of an older title like Melee, I mean, you just look at the cross comparisons between what we've had on the FGC side with some of our kind of more historic titles like Third Strike, Super Turbo. It's like, yeah, they're not necessarily growing scenes, but they're stable and consistent within their own right. And sure, they're not recognized necessarily as an esport by any means, but there's definitely like its own niche and very valuable community aspect that brings to kind of the rest of fighting game events and that community and culture as a whole. And I'm sure a lot of people would be upset with that perspective necessarily, that like, yeah, like Melee's probably not going to grow. Melee's probably never going to get recognized by Nintendo in any official capacity or support. Not like Ultimate necessarily is. But it has its place, man. Like, end of the day, like, you love your game. Just play your game. Like, does it always need to be for the actual kind of like quote unquote esports of it?
Right. You can play the game just out of passion because you love to do it.
Yeah, like I'm playing like seriously, like the fighting game I put the most time into is like, if you've heard of it, it's the full like Unist or Under Night in Birth EXE.
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like a niche like fighting game that like the biggest tournament like entry it has, like Evo. I forgot how many they had at Evo, but it was like a few hundred for sure. Like it was a strong representation. Outside of that, like it peaks usually at most events like under 100, right? But like we just like the game, man. Just play the game. It's fun. Who cares? So that's like the origin, right? It's like if we're not having fun doing this, like what? Why? Who cares?
I do think that is a problem with some other esports titles, is they've become so caught up in the business aspect of it and trying to just get it out there that I think at times it does become a risk of it being not as fun.
Well, and especially with fighting games too, because like we're not running off of franchise leagues or anything like that at this juncture, and it's still the competitive like landscape on the publisher tours. It's all networked with grassroots based events, right? And people go to grassroots events because they have fun playing the games, you know?
Right, yeah.
If you lose that part of like the identity of your community and like the culture built around that game, nothing else matters.
It's true. There is a real issue at times with, I don't know, people just trying to make a thing work, a league work. We've seen this, I think, a lot with some of these super franchise leagues early on. With E-League at times that felt very forced. What was the fighting game? Oh, by the way, did you ever find out the stuff, this Riot stuff? Okay, so we never actually figured out what the rules were for league players. Yeah, but there's been a couple times where I felt like things have been forced, where they try to bring fighting games into, I guess, what you guys would call an quote unquote esports thing, and it doesn't seem like it's very organic.
I mean, it has its place too, because I mean, end of the day, right? It's like we want to strive to, who doesn't want to see this thing that they love become a sustainable career path for the people that are the best at it, right?
Right.
Like, so there is a bit of the catch-22. It's like we love.
Might be careful with that cup with the mic. Sorry. Please carry on.
No, it's like we love the organic. Like we love the organic nature of it, but we also want it to be a sustainable platform for like our cream of the crop to a certain extent. Like we want what's best for the people that have really taken and like elevated what our games are.
Yeah.
So it's like I think there's realistically it's the loudest voices are always the most obnoxious sometimes, right?
Very
so it's
true.
like the vast majority I think of fighting game fans and like the FGC as a whole like knows where those kind of events fit into the grand scheme of our community and how they're important. They do help provide sustainability, but I don't think anybody in their right mind necessarily thinks that that's like the end all be all future of like that's not the end goal for that to our community to exclusively live in kind of pro level invitational events or even potentially franchised events. So it's not necessarily the most organic thing, but it has its role, has its place for us.
I wanted to ask you this earlier, but this conversation has been great, by the way. It's been so interesting. I wanted to ask you about what you've been doing with Roadrunner Records and Electro Music Group. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure, yeah, for sure.
The sponsorships and everything.
This one, this one, I guess it comes with a little bit more backstory as well. So like, I don't even remember the year anymore. 2000.
Can you grab him a beer too for me, buddy, while we're doing this?
Beer me. That'd be great. Only right that I'm drinking a beer talking about metal music and
that's right,
games.
man.
Yeah, right.
This is the punk rock part of the podcast.
Hell yeah. But there still is in Northeast originally out of like New Jersey, a fighting game event. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Crack that right into the microphone. Let everyone know. Yeah.
We really are drinking beer, guys. Okay, we are fucking cool.
In Korea, drinking Singtown nonetheless.
Yeah,
right?
so we're drinking. It's only Chinese beer in my refrigerator right now. Cheers.
Cheers, bud. So starting with East Coast Throwdown was an major event in New Jersey, and I think like over the years kind of like flatlined to a certain degree. And like 2016, 2017, that was ran by, I'm sure everyone knows who like L.I. Joe is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then his partner, Sweet Johnny Cage. And it kind of was like flatlining based off of, handful of factors, just like their involvement in other things, Joe's kind of like integrity as like a player, and also just like year over year, like we are at the end of the day a growing community, and the needs and expectations of an event increases, right? It needs more hands, more players, or just like partners involved to kind of keep the train moving. And it was something that I think, is potentially going to be given up as an event. It wasn't going to continue anymore, and just kind of being friends with those guys, supporting their events as like a player, and just like as a general regional TO as well for a while. Something I wanted to make sure didn't die. So me and a couple other TO partners, and also one of my coworkers still, used to go by Bacardi. No one calls him that anymore. Walter Willie P. He stepped up with me, joined kind of like a partnership with John and Joe to keep East Coast Throwdown moving. Just like, okay, well, let's look at how we grow this thing. How do we want to develop this as a brand? Because it felt like you were looking at the space. You had, CEO, right? Became this like crazy like culture like crossover between professional wrestling and fighting games, like, right? And it was super unique and cool. You look at what Combo Breaker became, and it was almost like the music festivals of fighting games, right?
Yes.
Or just had that feel. It's like everything mattered. There was dozens and dozens of games. It was spread out, but you were kind of forced to mingle with all these communities. No one was ever really like treated better than or lesser than another. So it created that unique thing. It's like, okay, well, like how does East Coast Throwdown not just be another
another random event.
Yeah, another just like gray event, which honestly a sea of kind of events, especially in the US, it's now almost like somewhat saturated to a degree. And we were thinking, it's like, okay, Joe as like a person, very outspoken, like everyone knows his love of like hardcore music. Like, hey, personally, I'm like a fan of metal, hardcore, punk, that kind of scene. Like, there's a lot of cool cultural and aesthetic, aesthetic components of metal,
sure,
that would make for like a cool like branding opportunity, right? And just like a general like event aesthetic, and also just like from just like a community sense too. Like you think about like all the DIY aspect of like hardcore, like punk and metal and stuff like that, and we're like, oh my god.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, FGC, so much of it is kind of punk rock compared to a lot of the other gaming things. It's.
You'll have to look this up afterwards. This guy that runs Hotchka, he runs an event out of Vienna, Austria, called Viennality. It's like a very like NetherRealm forward event, but like his like big like tagline for his event is like FGC is punk rock, because he's like a punk rock drummer and stuff like that. And I was like, that's what it is. Like culturally speaking, like the fans like themselves, the vast majority probably don't really care about heavy music in any way, shape, or form. But like culturally speaking, I'm like, dude, there's a lot of similarities between the two. Just that like DIY ethic, for sure.
We're not interested in what's going on over there. We have our own thing here.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, and it's very obvious that like FGC does its own thing in a lot of times, even if it is like still might be like esports in a way, right? It's our own way.
Yeah.
But regardless, we developed like this whole new like facelift for what this event was, and like thinking about like the experience, and we landed on that kind of metal aesthetic. We went through it, did our first year, and just it certainly like gave off a little bit of that vibe from just like a digital presence, and maybe not necessarily like a physical one at that point yet, because we were just kind of like it's all bootstrapped, right? It's like all coming out of our pockets, right? There's only so much you can do when you're playing with your own money as like a 20-something-year-old. Not too much you can do. And then for some reason, Joe got put in contact. Someone reached out to him from Roadrunner as they were starting their own Twitch, just to like, come on, play like Dragon Ball and some other games with them, mess around. So he met some of the dudes there. And then, I had him, was like, hey, there might be something more here. Like, let's all sit down together. Let's like meet with these guys. Turns out they're Jersey guys like me. So we just like met up in like Jersey City somewhere, just like ate like sausages and like had some beers and talked about it for a while. Just like showed them what we were about, and our branding kit, eerily speaking, like was very similar to theirs, with the deep like reds and blacks and whites, the typical metal aesthetic. And just kind of like talked about it. It's like, hey, it's like, this is kind of like the value proposition. Like, I think we can bring to the table, to like create a platform for your artist, your music, and your brand. And they kind of agree that like, hey, like this makes sense. Let's just try it. Nothing crazy monetarily in any way, sense or form. Just leveraging like everything from kind of like their licensing from like a music rights and IP side, to just some of their other resources. And it just felt very cohesive the first year, just like on a launch year, right? Is like being able to actually kind of like mesh their bands and IPs into our event feel and experience. We actually had a guy who like from one of their bands he's like a fighting game player. Like he plays like Dragon Ball and Mortal Kombat stuff. He like came out and competed. It's like now like one of our like super close friends that we just like hang out with. Cool. Again. Yeah. And just playing like, it just created this really unique environment where we were actually able to like use a lot of their music within our on-site and like broadcast presentation as well.
Quick question with that. What are the rules for using music for events? I know in Korea our laws are really laxed. So like when I do GSL, we can use any song.
Sure.
And legally not get punished or penalized for it. But I know in different countries there's different rules. I know Germany's very strict. What music, assuming that you did not have any kind of collaboration with this group, are there any specific rules about what songs you can play?
Depending on the medium. Yeah. 100%. Okay. So in the context of like offline, right? I guess technically speaking, like you could get dinged for like public performances, like by using those musics within or using like licensed music at your events. But it's always like, it's such a weird gray area that I feel like unless it's,
it's also quite difficult to actually go after somebody for playing a song somewhere.
Yeah, it can be. Actually, I forgot. There's a couple different groups out there that are like authorities, and they actually do send kind of like, it's usually for like bars and restaurants and stuff, like sending kind of like undercover representatives to like double check if they have like the license, like the general like group licensing to like be playing at like publicly and stuff. But like it's like, dude, no one's coming to our event yet. Anyways, to check
not yet.
Because technically speaking, it's like not even like the record labels can like provide that clearance for you. But it's like,
really?
You get hit with a fine. It's like $50, $100, something like that.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
It's pretty minor from what we understand. Nothing crazy. But from, you're talking about digital distribution, right? Like Twitch is like, yeah, your VODs will get
muted,
which isn't a big thing for us, but like YouTube, right? Like, and this is where we started playing around with something interesting, where it's, unless we did kind of look to explore and pay for licensing to the individual artist, not just like the label, right? It's can't really get away with it. So it's, the way that we kind of set our dynamic up is like when we have our VODs go up on our platform on YouTube or something like that, right? It's, the bots that like entity like Warner Music Group has, which is like the total parent to Elektra, Roadrunner, all of that. Flags the hell out of anything like instantaneously. But it's that's kind of like the give and take of like the value prop, right? Is like we're to a certain degree letting them copyright claim our work using their music. So it creates like in a way additional like revenue stream for them, and like for us it's like that's not necessarily a revenue driver for us per se at this juncture. So it's just kind of like, us being able to legally use real like metal artists within the confines of like our work is just something really cool.
What other kind of collaborations are there that maybe gaming could have? I mean, we've seen wrestling. We're just now talking about metal music. Is there other ways that different types of I want to say niche interests, but they're not really niche. They're actually major nerd interests.
I want to see culinary so bad, dude.
Food. I feel like people have been trying to get food into gaming for a while, but it to not a great success.
Well, because you know what I feel like it is, right? It's like everybody kind of like from like an organizational level or like like a talent level. So like from commentary talent, event organizers, kind of like top level players, for whatever reason, it's like we're all very gravitated towards like food as like a cultural like aspect of how we integrate with people in like our communities. It's just such a general like passion point of ours. But you like when I talk like go to events, right? Like half the people at like any of our fighting events they go to, they're like, oh, is there like a McDonald's nearby? Right? Like,
I guess that's true. There is a whole thing with certain groups of gamers where they just don't want to.
It's price, right?
Comfort zone.
It's like
price, yeah.
It's expensive to go to an event. Like, I'm not gonna lie. It's like you're paying for a plane ticket, your hotel, like your venue fees, like any merch you're buying. Like, yeah, you're probably trying to like live that on a budget, right? So you can go to more and more events. So I get it, but it's like we have this warped perception, as kind of like that, like almost like inner circle, so to speak, of like, yeah, this is great for this makes so much sense, but it's like just us in reality. Yeah. I'm not sure like the widespread adoption is necessarily there to like really like be true, but dude, who knows until you try, right?
Yeah, I mean, I never would have imagined we would see wrestling together in an event.
But that's also the beauty of like all the grassroots stuff in the fighting games, is because we are grassroots and we are just like representation of our own brand. It's like we can take risks, man. Like
that is true. In Korea, we had a lot of K-pop groups. We still do it from time to time, have K-pop groups open up at StarCraft events. But I've always felt like it's kind of weird. But I'm also not into K-pop. I get asked this a lot, like, what kind of K-pop do you listen to? I'm not into it.
My fiance loves it.
Oh, really?
I mean, she's Korean American, so like makes sense. So like I know like the majority of bands. I'm like, yeah, I know that one. Like I hear it. Yeah.
I've met so many K-pop stars because I'm working backstage at these. But I don't remember who they are because I don't listen to any of that. I mean, I'll listen to it and it's fine, but I'm not into it. You know what I'm saying? But we would have our venues sometimes fill up, and I would think, great, we got this great audience. This is going to be a great show. And then the K-pop group would play 2 songs and they would be done, and then the audience would leave, and they'd be like, oh fuck, what did we just do?
Well, it's almost like, remember the first Overwatch League finals with like they had like Khaled do their yeah. And
I mean, guy who shouts his name over other songs, yeah.
Like don't get me wrong, like if you're like planning that event, that's like a sensical thing. Like it's
sure,
I guess like the pieces make sense, and then just like in practicality, it's like you're just panning around and like you see like the dead face of like an 11-year-old just like blankly staring like what is happening. And I think there's always a handful of people into it, but like that's and that's what's been really cool about working with like Roadrunner and Electra, is like they get it. It's not just like, let's just put our dudes out in front of this like and see what happens. It's like, let's think about all the other like connective tissue points like throughout this community that we can integrate to, that's not like so forward. Because like let's face it, like the demographic base for like gaming communities or esports in general, like they're so varied, right? Like it's any other like consumer sample, right? Like there is a mix of every kind of music fan within those venues. Like I can't just force like a Slipknot down like my 1,300 attendees' throats.
Right.
Like it doesn't work. It's like trying to find like the nuanced ways that you can kind of like integrate them to not be so obtrusive, but still like add to kind of like what the feel and aesthetic and like platform of our event is.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of times when you get just gaming in general. I mean, this is why I always find the term, when people talk about being gamers, I always find this kind of funny because it's like everybody plays games at this point in time. But yeah, it's hard to find just one kind of mold for that. So
yeah. And actually, we'll see. I'm very confident that in the near future there will be some really cool kind of music-based integrations too. Like, have you seen what some of the like Twitch extensions and plugins that exist for some of like the music platforms?
I have not. Can you tell me about that? I don't know anything about that.
Well, and trust me, like still like I have a very rudimentary understanding of how this exactly works. But the use case is very specific for it. So like Amazon Music, right? Like it has like a 2-way extension so it's like both on a broadcaster and a user base. So you can download, or like if both the broadcaster and the viewer has the extension downloaded, right, there is a ongoing and running Amazon Music based soundtrack or playlist that's running. And apparently, so what actually happens is it actually counts as like a listen per unique user actually listening. So when you're talking in the confines of like a label like Roadrunner Records, right, if there's 500 people watching with the extension on and they all have it tuned in, they're actually getting kind of like their whatever the royalty is probably not the right word to describe it, right? But for like each play, it's like their piece of the pie.
Oh, cool.
For listening that way. The problem is it's like the adoption for it is definitely like more so from just like the streamer at home, not necessarily for like an event case.
But that idea is really interesting.
Yeah, and I think
but that's
evolve.
A plugin. That's not Twitch doing that.
No, Twitch is doing it.
Okay,
it's, the Amazon umbrella.
Okay, yeah.
And it's like a clever way to tie it into like some of their other Amazon platforms. So it's like just being able to have that direct feed into Amazon Music, and especially because like I don't know how many percentage of Twitch viewers are also like Amazon Prime subscribers, but like if you're an Amazon Prime subscriber, you have Twitch Music. Or not Twitch Music, Jesus, Amazon Music.
Right, yeah.
So it's like, it's just not necessarily communicated well, I guess, as far as kind of like how that can be implemented and adopted. It's very new, too.
Yeah, I had no idea about it until you brought it up.
So definitely something that I want to see, like that is something that I really want to see evolve, especially for our use case. We actually tried to use it this year, and there's just like some weird short, for East Coast Throwdown, there's some weird limitations to it as it currently stands that like if they can solve some of those issues, oh man, some pretty awesome possibilities open up for sure, especially on like how a music label gets like their ROI on like collaborations in this space.
Dude, that's so sick. Yeah, I got to check that out. I had no idea. Your girlfriend or wife, you have to meet with her pretty soon?
Fiance? Let's see.
So in between the two, I got
yeah,
close enough.
Yeah.
What time is it right now?
I got plenty of time. She gets out at 6.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, she's I got booked some like super famous like Korean tattoo artist or something like that.
Okay, excellent. How was this podcast for you, by the way? It was good?
It's cool. Yeah, easy.
Awesome, man. I want to have you back next time you're coming through Seoul again, dude.
I would love to, dude. It's first time coming, and I'd love to come back maybe when it's a little warmer.
Yeah, the winters here are pretty brutal, man. Okay, we're gonna wrap this episode up, and then we're just gonna go to an after show. It's not that long at all. It's just for Patreon supporters. But
for sure.
Thank you so much for doing this, man.
No, absolutely, man. Pleasure's all mine.
Nice meeting you. This is the first time I've ever not met the person beforehand. We wanted to try this as an experiment where we just bring you in and just jump right into it. So I hope this wasn't too overwhelming or weird or anything like that.
No, not at all. And I'm pretty sure from like the inception of your show towards the potentially unlimited future of it, I will be like the lowest imprint guest ever.
I don't know about that, man. You're doing some pretty cool shit.
Who knows? So.
All right, sick. Let's go to that after show now. Thanks for listening, everybody. Again, that's the last episode we recorded in 2019, and we are getting ready to roll out with some video production here in our studio in 2020, which I'm really excited about. I don't know if you guys made any New Year's resolutions, but if you did, best of luck with them. My goal is to try to work out 3 times a week, and I don't know, maybe I'll step it up from there if I get in good enough shape. And I'm on a detox from drinking for 3 weeks, which is feeling amazing. Already about a week into that. Again, our video production is going to cost a little bit more. If you can support us on Patreon, even $5 goes a long way. It's really appreciated. There is also an after show that plays that only Patreon supporters can get after to. So if you want to check that out, we've given you something to incentivize you to do so. So I think that's all I got to say here. Again, the next episode is going to be on video. I'll be recording that either today or tomorrow, and that'll be released in the near future. Guys, I love you. Again, thank you so much. I've been having a lot of fun doing this podcast, and I will see you again in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye. This podcast was produced by State, artwork by Alarise, music by Mark Lentz. Special thanks to our top Patreon supporters, Seth N., Rohit Sambadi, John Kernicki, and Charlie Sheaver.